Hello folks, welcome to another edition of the GC People Leaders series. In this interview, it's my privilege to be talking with Siobhan Martin. Siobhan is the Global HRBP Director at Aegon Asset Management. She's had a number of C-suite roles across several sectors, having had an earlier career as a consultant, but she spent the last 20 years in financial services. She also sits on a number of boards. She's a fellow of Monash University in Australia. She has a PhD in forensic psychology, and she's involved in the Church of England and active in LGBT rights. So Siobhan, welcome, great to have you.
Thank you. It's really nice to talk to you today.
So in GC Index terms, your main energies are in the strategist and implementer space, but as we hopefully will learn, or the audience will learn shortly, it's more complex than that. So in terms of your profile, Siobhan, as a leader, when do you feel that you are playing out those energies in your GC Index profile to the best effect?
My very best days, the ones that I feel very, I think we're getting somewhere here, is when there's really good work about what the possible could be, the art of the possible. Where might we go with something? How might that future look? What could we do with that? And then we have a good plan for how that might start to unfold. Even if it's just the beginning of it, not necessarily every single thing itemised and nailed to the floor, but that we're beginning to move in a direction to at least make that happen. That's when I know. And I think, I think we're kicking some goals here.
So it's interesting because that seems to combine your energies for the game changer space with that big amount, that sort of intense amount of energy to consider and plan and make sense of things. So it's taking those initial opportunities or ideas and really bringing them to life, really saying, where do those fit in the grand scheme of things, and what does that mean?
Always, what does it mean? Where's the why? And then the how.
As a leader, how do you get to the why? How's that happen for you?
It happens from lots of different directions, but fundamentally listening, reading, listening, looking, observing, and seeing things that may be well outside where I currently sit. I work in financial services and I have all of those other connections as well. So taking really full advantage of that and seeing as much of the world as is possible. I mean, that feels like an immensity to even say that, but to be constantly connected beyond our four walls, our offices, our home offices, wherever we might be, and draw those thoughts and connections. What data can we take from that? And what might that be telling us? Where are our worries? Where are our risks? What might be coming to us? What things are we seeing a lot of? Where in our own world, in the company that I work with, Aegon, always thinking about, but what's working, what's not working? And then processing that, don't just live as an amorphous mass, but how can we try to make sense of that for the here and now?
Yeah.
And that's where we move then into what are we going to do about it? So that gives us the why. And because I work with people so much, and my line of work, my paid line of work is in human resources, that's where the why is coming from. What makes the most sense for our people? What is difficult? What is not right now? And how can we make that better?
So it sounds as though you're really, coming from that strategist energy space, you're really taking in huge amounts of information and arriving eventually at a sense of, this is what this all means, and this is what's actually sitting behind this. This is the thing that we must do. This is the reason why we must do it, and being able to give that clarity as a leader to people about why do we need to do something, and what is it that we actually need to do.
Right. Yeah, because I think it's very difficult for people to then go ahead and do something, get on with their jobs, deliver whatever it is they deliver, if they're not necessarily connected to that why, if they don't understand what the purpose of that was. I mean, you can just make stuff or do stuff, but it's a soulless existence. And it's not necessarily it probably won't give you a good outcome. So let's keep coming back to that, because it also helps us to make good decisions about where to put your energy if you're clearer about the why. Because then that means that a whole bunch of noise, whole bunch of things just fall away. Well, we clearly can't do that because we always said that we were going after this for this reason. So it's very effective then in making decisions. And I find myself to be a highly decisive person, but I love to think about those things. So then because I've thought a lot about it and I've taken a lot of data in, then I'll be able to make a good decision. To be a good decision quickly.
It sounds almost as though it kind of helps you to be more decisive, because when you get to the point where you're ready to make a decision, it's a very, very well considered and thought through decision, as opposed to being a decision that's driven by other factors.
Yeah, exactly. Because taking the time to get all of that together in the first place. I mean, it seems facile and, we're talking big picture stuff here, but, down to what are we're going to have for dinner tonight? I don't need to spend any time on that because I know the things that I like and that the kids like and, what's available right here, right now, what's in the fridge, it's all that kind of stuff. But you can take exactly the same thinking into the much bigger, more potent areas. How are we going to resource our company and where are we going to drive to today? And how do we need to course correct so in the next 5 years we will have the talent that we want, et cetera, et cetera. Those big questions, well, if you're constantly bringing in data to that and creating yourself a journey for it, then you suddenly discover in 5 years' time that you don't have the talent that you need, or you're behind the 8 ball, you haven't adjusted your policies, et cetera, et cetera.
It's that gets me thinking actually, Siobhan, because it seems as though in many contexts in the modern world we're very driven by the impulsive here and now, and the need to think in that more complex manner, to think about all the different variables and try and make sense of where does everything fit together, where are we going, what's the why, how do we protect that why as we move forward. That isn't a leadership style perhaps that gets the publicity and the attention that maybe it should, but it's a leadership style that would seem to be incredibly powerful for a situation like the one that we're in now, where things are far more fluid and less certain.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And it's not a style that engenders itself to people who want to be flashy about things and to come up with the next great big idea, because actually most next big ideas have actually, someone else has had them. You just either didn't realise them or you chose to ignore that.
Yeah.
One way or the other. So it's not an ego-driven style. And in all of that listening and that data gathering and so on, you really do have to pull yourself back from the I'm not the story.
Yeah.
Which is not always easy. It's not always very nice either, because you wouldn't necessarily get recognised or the accolades for that. So I understand why it's not a common thing to want to do. But I've found it to be immensely effective over my years, to then mean that I can now, as an older woman, then pull back on I've had a lot of experience, and you can, if you so listen to me now, and I think we've got a lot that we can offer here. But it was tougher when I was younger, and I understand that for young people, when they're trying to make their mark, that's not necessarily the way they're going to get themselves heard or felt or experienced.
And that's a really powerful point, because I sense that one of the things that we talk about with impact is that that people have a proclivity to make a certain impact, but they then have to acquire skills to make them to make that impact into a strength, so that they can then make a contribution more effectively. And it sounds as though, as you were saying, you've really built up the skills and the experience and the scar tissue and everything that goes with all that behind that package of energies that you present as a leader, which means that now you can get to those important points as a leader far more quickly than perhaps you could have done earlier in life. But also that people allow you to do that more maybe now, because you have the gravitas that comes with experience.
Yeah, indeed. There's something in there about permission from others as well as permission from yourself for those things to be fruitful and impactful now. And yes, I could say a lot about the position of women and how we have not necessarily listened to them, and very poor experiences I've personally had through my business life, and that I have witnessed for other people. However, we know those things, we don't need to rehearse them. But I think moving on from that, it's always but what do we take from it? Where can we go with that now? What can we move on from and say, okay, but we find ourselves here and now in this very moment, so what are we going to do?
Very, very true. Very, very true. I mean, what advice would you give to people who may have energies in a similar space to you, who are early in their career, who need to make a name for themselves, who need to get on, but whose energies don't lead them into being the loud, obsessively creative ideas people? What advice would you give them from your experience?
Well, part of it is not losing hope. Don't be disheartened by that, because you're disheartened. By being disheartened, you might fall away from it, and that would be deeply unfortunate, because then the world won't get to benefit from you and the great things that you have. Another possibly more helpful answer is find other people who are in that space and be good partners, because those people could be the partnership with you to help be more of the marketing element of it, the front of it. And so there might be a colleague or colleagues that you work with, or that are in different organisations or different groups or whatever, where you can make a happy partnership together. You don't want to do that to the diminishment of your own involvement and advice and so on. So it's very important to nicely contract that with those people. But then there can be a more of a symbiotic relationship there as you also grow your skill. The other thing I would say is don't diminish those aspects of yourself, because yes, my preference is to behave in these particular ways, but I absolutely understand that I need to flex it. Other days I will pull energy absolutely from different places. Mm-hmm. Take the time to think what's required here and now. How can I best serve this moment? Sometimes that's hanging back, sometimes that's going right in there, sometimes that's connecting other people so they can make those things happen. But if you ask yourself that question and then be prepared to step into that space and do that thing, I think that it's very important. It's not right to say, well, my energy doesn't leave that way, so I'm not going to be that person or do those things.
Yeah.
No. It does require you to flex and to move.
And I mean, I suppose in some respects, people with energies similar to those of your own are probably more capable of doing that, because they have the energy to look at situations in that holistic way and make sense of them. So it's almost, I wonder whether the opportunity for people like that is to actually use their energies to help them know when to use different energies, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, yes, I think you need to be really tuned into that. Know thyself, super important. Also, know the circumstance you're in no other people in that circumstance, so you can draw on them.
Yeah.
Different models of leadership. Well, there's many, aren't there? And we can always find a different person that matches whichever one suits our purposes at that time. I have a great love of Napoleonic history, and obviously his arch nemesis, the Duke of Wellington, two incredibly different people who achieved incredibly different things in very different ways at a moment in history. So we could use one example as a great leader or another depending on our sorts. Well, but one of the things that they absolutely had in common was the ability to bring out the best for the people that they worked with, who were very different from them in that moment that was required. So that means you've got to have your eyes and ears very much open, and to allow those people that space to do that.
Yeah, which actually brings me to another question, Siobhan, is how do you personally manage and get the best out of people who are obsessively creative and driven by ideas, and or maybe people who lack the pragmatism that you naturally focus on, or the ability to execute on things? How do you work with people like that as a leader?
Yeah, because sometimes that can be very frustrating for me. And noticing my frustration, I think, is important. Noticing when I feel very uncomfortable, noticing when other people do too, to the extent that it's possible to do that, is important. Because then over my years, I've been thinking, okay, well, so what do I need to do to counteract, and how can I be a good partner so we don't end up, and all the worst possible worlds of that. And so one of the things that I find incredibly helpful is I write down things so that I will remember, and that when I'm listening, I'm catching, and then helping to take the thread of that. So someone who's incredibly creative and has got massively wonderful ideas and possibilities and can see the world in this amazing way, that can be headachy for someone like me who's like, oh yeah, but brilliant, but we'll never get that done. But if we just keep listening to that, and then we can draw all of those thoughts together, maybe there is something that we can connect out of this, and then begin to make that into something practical, which then can reflect back and say, if we did A, B, C, D, E, whatever, then would that begin to get us into the place where you're imagining that it would be good? I also honestly have had to be just very comfortable with the time, and not to feel incredibly overwhelmed with the, oh my God, this will never happen. Sometimes you do get overwhelmed by that, but other times it's, look, the time just might not be right for this thing here and now, but that doesn't mean it's not good or that we should definitely forget it. Let's park that. Let's hang on to the thought. Let's keep it in here in a little notebook or in a repository of discussion with somebody else, and then we can return to it at a good moment.
That's incredibly powerful. It sounds like you almost take other people's contributions to the bigger story and kind of embroider them in at the right point. So it very much serves the people around you, in that it makes them able to contribute, but it also slots their contribution into a bigger why, into a bigger narrative that means that collectively everybody gets where they need to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm just...
Yeah, that we draw. So there's a lot of... I visualize it for myself as casting that net over, and then, what do we draw back? What can we pull together that might be useful for this moment? And it could come from absolutely anywhere, within our business, within someone else's business, within a completely different sector, within a completely different field. From the work of the creative arts, visual arts, poetry, mathematics. I work with the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, a whole different world of creativity and very different ways of looking at the world, taking that moment and seeing things from a completely different perspective. But then my thing is always, but then what, how might that be useful? How could we, that's very interesting. What are we going to do with that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's real food for thought. And I think people reading or watching this will probably be reflecting on just how powerful that is as a leadership impact. Another example really of how many different ways leaders can make an impact. I mean, to what extent, Siobhan, do you think that process that you just described that you go through as a leader is actually visible to the people that you are working with?
I think it varies. And one of the magical parts of that is, and again, where the ego needs to step aside, is sometimes it can be invisible, but I am gratified personally by an impact. I'm a great believer in being outcome focused, and again, to help guide principles in life and principles in business. And if we don't think so much about the input to this particular thing, but what are we trying to achieve, and then be very open to how that we might achieve that, staying, of course, absolutely within our moral guidelines and our ethical guidelines. And it's so critical in human life, but it's absolutely critical, of course, in financial services sector. I'm in no way advocating that, means to an end is all fine. No. But that we understand all of, what's going on. So then I don't need to worry so much about having rules and regulations because they're understood and very clear. And a great current example is the whole question of flexible working. How do we have the right flexibility to deliver what we need to deliver as a business and as human beings? Well, if we take it from the point of view that we agree what it is that we want to achieve, and then we allow people the trust as adults to achieve it, again, within the right guardrails, then we don't have to have screeds and screeds of stuff saying things like, you'll work between this hour and that hour and you'll do this and you'll do that, etc., etc. They're all important conversations to have with people, but it ceases to be, we cease to operate in that very tight way that allows people the freedom to really bring their whole self to solving whatever the problem is. And again, now I'm thinking about the wonderful work that happens at Monash University, who I'm a fellow there, and I've been chair of the Global Alumni Committee for the last 5 years. So having the great privilege of being connected to amazing minds and amazing people around the world who are working to solve society's big questions and then bringing their own skill to bear on that. So how do we eradicate malaria in the world? How do we improve life in slum living? Developing communities. How do we solve hearing loss? So the bionic ear, the bionic eye is the next, big thing here. How can we bring sight to unsighted people? All those really huge, big questions. But you can achieve that kind of thing because you bring people together and enable their great creativity. Allow them to do that in a way that works very best for them, focusing on the outcome.
I feel I should ask, actually.
We can, solve great things. Sorry, John.
No, it's fine. No, you got me thinking, Siobhan. I feel I should ask, because I know you're involved in making a contribution to a number of social issues. How can your leadership impact help with with getting the world to a better place on those various issues. The reason I ask that is because if you look in the media, it's very dominated by activism and people pushing a message about a specific issue. But in your leadership impact, I hear a different approach. So how are you helping to make a difference in the issues you care about with your leadership style?
Yeah, again, it comes back to that. If you push your ego aside from that, and then, well, what do we want things to be different here? Example, how do we make sure that women are fairly represented in the workforce? And I don't just mean they have a chair. I mean that, we're really a part of that decision making process and really very present with the running of the world. That same thing for LGBT plus individuals as well, just to take some, very current examples, that we move beyond our particular racial divides, etc., but to be able to bring the wonderful background, knowledge, experiences we have because we are part of those groups and those communities. If we look at it from the point of, again, from the point, what do we want to achieve here? Well, we want to achieve those things by bringing all those different things, all those different characteristics and so forth right here, right now. And to do that, you often have to be in the backseat and do those things and be gratified that they happened. I love that people point out problems and they show us what the world could look like. My next question is always, brilliant, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What am I going to do? How are we going to do that? Ownership, accountability, huge issues for me. You have to take ownership and you must be accountable. You can't just plop something into the middle of the room and walk away.
I love what you say about putting the ego to one side. That I sense in your energies that that you have the capability to say, okay, this sequence of events is needed to get us to the ultimate point we want to get to. And that's coming from that strong sense of why you talked about earlier. And because you can see that clearly, you're able to say, okay, I need to put how I feel right now as an individual to one side, and I need to do what's serving the situation best as a leader, as opposed to perhaps serving myself. And that's, I think there's something very powerful there. I mean, and I'm conscious of time, Siobhan, so it's fortunately want to be the last question. I sense we could talk all afternoon. What's the one piece of advice you'd give to leaders around the world right now in today's situation from your experience?
One, that's tough, isn't it? Put yourself aside from this. What's really needed right here and right now, and who honestly is the best person to do that? Choose those people or persons. Maybe it is in fact you. If so, get it together, make it happen, or work really well with others so that they can get it together and make it happen.
Siobhan, you've left us all with huge food for thought. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to talk to you.